Hello and welcome back to video number 10 in level 6. We're getting there and it's time to move on from the verb tenses and we're going to study the passive voice. And I know you have done this, so it'll be a review, a spiral, and then add some complexity. But first, as always, my name is Anna Shine and I'd like to say good morning if it's morning where you are, good afternoon if it's afternoon where you are, and good evening if it's evening where you are. So, the passive voice, as you've probably heard from us, English teachers don't like the passive voice and computer programs don't like the passive voice. If you use the passive voice when you're typing in English, often there's a red line from Microsoft or Grammarly or one of these programs, or from your English teacher. But there are times when we do need to use the passive voice, and when the writing or what we say actually sounds better with the passive voice. In general, we avoid the passive voice, in general. But there are times, and again, I can say music again, it's a new video. When you start to have the music of the language, you will know when to use it and when to not. So should we start? Let's go, let's press that arrow. Forming and using the passive voice. That's just what I said. So a lot of these slides have a lot of text, So as always, usually I will talk and block the text, and then I will read it to you. Sometimes if I think it's better just to read directly, I will read directly. But we will see, okay? So should we begin? Forming and using the passive voice. Ah, that's not too much. That is the queen in there. There she is. Hard life, that queen, isn't it? All right. So let me read this to you, and this will tell us when we use it, when we use the passive voice. Okay? We have just reviewed verb tenses in the active voice. We did a lot of videos. We did 9 videos, didn't we? Was it 9 on the well, this is number 10. So we've done all the tenses though. That was hard work. Well done you. American, good job. Now it's time to learn how to present these same tenses. So we're going to go through every tense again, but we're going to do it with the passive voice, in the passive voice. Actually, we generally avoid using the passive voice, just what I said. But let's clarify when we use it. So, when the agent, so the subject, if we say someone ate pizza, that someone is the subject, but it's not important. Someone does not, in this case, that someone does not have a lot of meaning, a lot of relevance, a lot of importance to the sentence. When the subject, when we also, and this is important when dealing with passive voice, the subject is also known as the agent or the actor when we use the passive voice. So when it's unimportant, then we would use it. When you want the actor to remain unknown, if you don't want to say who made the action, who did the action. In formal writing. So we do use the passive more in formal writing than in everyday spoken English. But an English teacher will still, in writing, often say this is not a good use of the passive voice. Try and use the active. But we do use it. We do use it. And it is important not only to understand it, but to know when to use it and how to use it so that you can change the type of English you use according to the situation you are in. Because language changes according to our situation. When you have tea at Buckingham Palace with the Queen. So the Queen, and all through these videos we talk about this, uses very formal English, and she really does. And her accent is very posh, very formal. But her English is very posh. And so we say if you are invited, and you might be, to have tea at Buckingham Palace, where formal language is required, you might well hear and need to use the passive voice. But let's even say this is not so likely, and I'm not suggesting you're not going to be invited to have tea at Buckingham Palace. But the other three are very important as well, or more important, we should say. All right? So this is clarifying when we use the passive voice. You ready for the next slide? Many, and this will appear again at the very end, but not all verbs can be changed from an active voice to a passive voice. Many, but not all. Not all. The general rule is if the verb takes an object, which is known as a transitive verb, and I'm sure you know this by now, it can be changed into the passive voice. So transitive verbs can be changed into the passive voice. On the other hand, we say on one hand and on the other hand. If the verb does not take an object, known as an intransitive verb, it cannot be changed into the passive voice. And easier than remembering rules is remembering music. But this is the general rule. All right? So we will look. We will look. Wow, there's a lot here and it looks complicated, but it's not. The general rule is the subject becomes the object or the actor, but we will look. Just hold tight. It is not complicated. There's a lot of stuff here, but it is not complicated. How to form the passive voice. You take the verb to be, which you know so well, plus the past participle of the verb, which you also know really well. This is the end of level 6. You know it very well. So if you have a sentence, an active sentence, I love my cacophonous parrots. My cacophonous parrots are loved by me. That's the passive voice, the passive sentence. A sentence with the passive voice, we could say. Let's look how we made it. So the active voice, the subject is I, the verb is love, and the object are those parrots, my cacophonous parrots. In the passive, we take the object and make it the subject. And we take the subject and make it the agent. So, my cacophonous parrots, that's the object. They become the subject. Are, there's the verb to be. Loved, the past participle. And this is the agent, and we use by. Don't bother about reading this yet. We'll read it in a moment. By is very important. You need to have the by. By me. Because I becomes the agent. Now I will read and you can follow. As you can see in the above example about the cacophonous parrots, when we change an active sentence into a passive one, the object of the active sentence becomes the subject of the passive one. It is important to note in the passive sentence, the subject of the active sentence becomes the by agent. And that's what we talked about. Do you see that? Becomes the by. Please don't forget to use it. Oh, I skipped a sentence. As it identifies who did the action. I, me. Or by whom the action was done. The by is very important. Please don't forget to use it. You do need to use it. If you are naming the agent, it is important. We will practice this more in a moment. So this is the basic structure. The subject of the active sentence becomes the by agent. I wanted to make sure I was reading the same thing you could see. The subject of the active sentence becomes the by agent. The object of the active sentence becomes the subject of the passive one. All good? Let's continue. I will read these to you in a minute, and I will stand on the side, and then you can read them with my voice or without my voice. The advantage of my voice is you hear my English, which is pretty good English. So let's look. We're going to look at these active tenses, learned American English, learned British English, and look at them in the passive voice. And you will see the verb to be that we use and the past participle, salted, 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 salted. The past participle of to salt. So we're talking about the roads when they get covered in snow. So in many parts of the United States, there's a lot of snow in winter. In parts of England or Scotland or anywhere around the world, there's a lot of snow on the roads. In the United States, they put salt on the road to break up the snow. In England or in the UK, they use grit, which is bits of teeny little stones. And so here we say they salt the roads. If we were talking about in England, we would say they grit the roads. So let's read this note. British English, to grit the roads. Grit is used in the UK while salt is used in the USA. Just a cultural little tidbit, a little bit of information culturally. Where you see the number 2, the superscript 2, you see there's no passive. We don't use the passive. In truth, the truth is that we rarely use it. But for level 6, for now, you can say never. It is really unusual, extremely unusual, extremely unusual. So here are the tenses, and here are the active voice sentences and the passive voice sentences. So let's look. Simple present. They salt the roads. The roads are salted. They are salting the roads. The roads are being salted. They salted the roads. The roads were salted. They were salting the roads. The roads were being salted. They have salted the roads. The roads have been salted. Present perfect progressive. They have been salting the roads. And here's an example where it's for now, never. Don't worry about it. One less thing to make music for. Past perfect. They had salted the roads. The roads had been salted. Past perfect progressive. They had been salting the roads. Again, for now, never. Where are we? Simple future. They will salt the roads. The roads will be salted. Which did we just do? That's the future. Be going to. They are going to salt the roads. The roads are going to be salted. Future perfect. They will have salted the roads. You know your future perfect now. The roads will have been salted. Future progressive. They will be salting the roads. Nothing more. Future perfect progressive, which you also know. They will have been salting the roads and nothing else. And that's it. So you can use this for reference. And the formation is not complicated. Just remember the verb to be and the past participle, and you are all good. All right? Let's go to the next slide. Let's look at some passive sentences which do and do not use the by agent, because I want you to see when it's important. So if the subject is important, I'm blocking it, then we would use it if it's important. So the first sentences we're going to look at, the subject is important. So let's look at those. And there's a Russian name here. And you remember I was terrible with that German name. I'm probably even worse with this Russian name. So for all you who speak Russian or come from Russia, I apologize in advance for my terrible pronunciation of this Russian name. I do apologize. So in the following examples, the subject, the actor, is important. Louis Pasteur discovered many things. These are active sentences, including the principle of pasteurization. Now, it is important who did this. So in that passive sentence, we say many things, including the principle of pasteurization, were discovered. But we want to know by whom. It's important. By Louis Pasteur. So we include it because it is important, and we have to have by. Amelia Earhart set a large number of aviation records. It's important that it was Amelia Earhart, because especially in those days, it was unusual for a woman to be a pilot. But especially, this is about a specific important person, Amelia Earhart. So then when we make it into the passive voice, a large number of aviation records were set by whom? That is important. By Amelia Earhart. So then we need to mention the actor. Here's my terrible Russian. Alexei Pajitnov. And I practiced many times for this video. Alexei Pajitnov, a Russian, invented the very popular video game Tetris. So it's important who did it. Tetris, so in the passive we're going to use his name. Tetris, the very popular video game, was invented by whom? By this Russian whose name I can't pronounce. By Alexei Pajitnov, a Russian. I apologize for that. So because the subject agent is important, we include the by plus agent in the passive form. And that is important. And please let us know how to pronounce this name if you want. All right, let's look at the next slide. All right, now let's look when we don't need to name, when it's not important who the subject is. Let's look at some passive sentences and which do not have any difficult names for me to pronounce. Let's look at some passive sentences. This is what we said, which do, that we did, and do not, that's now, use the by plus agent. In the following examples, the subject is not important. So let's look. We don't use the metric system in the United States. The metric system is not used in the United States. We could say by people, but it doesn't add any information. It isn't helpful to the sentence or useful. And so it sounds better and cleaner just to say the metric system is not used in the United States. No by and no agent. Do you see the difference between that and Amelia Earhart or Louis Pasteur, who are important, or the Russian inventor of Tetris, who is important? They, who is they? They is just a pronoun that doesn't have a lot of meaning. They sold the most expensive coin in the world for more than $7 million. Oh my gosh, what a lot of money. One coin for more than $7 million. We have a superscript. Let's check this before we check our passive. In 2002, for a coin that was a 1933 double eagle coin, so it had an American eagle on both sides, it sold for $7 million. Oh my gosh. Okay, so they sold the most expensive coin in the world for more than $7 million. The most expensive coin in the world was sold. We don't need to say by them, by the people. We understand. And it doesn't add anything. It would make the sentence more heavy. It's just better, clean like this. The most expensive coin in the world was sold for more than $7 million. Good English, passive voice, appropriate. So do you see the difference of when you need it and when you don't? Let's look at the third example. No one sells Coca-Cola in North Korea. Superscript 2, this is true. Who knew? How would we say this in a better way? If you wrote this in an essay, it would sound strange, and if you spoke it, it would sound really strange. We would say Coca-Cola is not negative passive, is not sold in North Korea. We don't need to say no one. We understand that, and it doesn't help. It makes the sentence heavier and less beautiful. Less beautiful. Okay, so there are times when we do need it and times when we don't. In general, we avoid the passive, but not always. There are times when the subject is not important, subject not important, when we need to use it, when it helps to use the passive, but not the by agent. All good? Let's continue. Let's look at an example that often leads to mistakes. We will keep it simple for clarity. So the dog, that's a cute dog, a baby dog, do you know how to, is puppy, P-U-P-P-Y, puppy. A baby dog is a puppy. The dog, it's actually a puppy, licks the bone. The following includes a typical student mistake. Includes typical student mistakes. All of these are typical student, well, one is correct. 3 of them are typical student mistakes. Which one of the following passive sentences is correct? There's only one correct sentence. Pause the video for a moment and decide. So I will tell you, pause the video. When you think you know, come back to me. So let's look at this. We've got bones, plural. Dog, singular. That is confirmed by third person singular S. One dog, the bones, that word is plural. So let's be careful. So here we've got the bone, singular. So this cannot be right, because although the grammar is correct, the bone is licked by the dog. That is perfectly correct. It's singular, and we have to bring the object to the subject. So it's one. So this is either correct or this is correct, because we've got a plural subject, and here we have the plural object. So we know this one, by definition of the bone, is not correct. So it's the bones are licked by the dog, or the bones is licked by the dog. Bones are, plural. It needs to take the plural form of the verb to be, third person plural. So that is the correct one. This is the correct answer, B. Did you get it correct? It doesn't matter if you didn't get it correct. What matters is if you can understand. So you ready for the next slide? Okay, we'll say goodbye to the puppy and go to the next slide. So do you remember a few slides back we talked about transitive and intransitive verbs? And only transitive verbs can be changed to the passive. Do you remember that? So let's look at that. While we're checking for understanding, let's check one more thing. Do you remember that a few slides ago we said this? If the verb takes an object, a transitive verb, it can be changed into the passive voice. You remember that because we saw it and I just said it. If the verb does not take an object, an intransitive verb, it cannot be changed into the passive voice. So let's look at this example. Well, there are two examples. A couple means two, a couple, like a man or man and woman or man and man, whatever you want. A couple, they're called a couple. A couple means two. We arrived in Phnom Penh yesterday. And the horse is neighing. To neigh is neigh, the sound a horse makes. Neither sentence has an object. Therefore, neither sentence can be made into the passive. That's the rule. And you will have the music so you can forget all the rules. No more rules for you. Let's look at the next slide. And it's time to practice. So, change the following sentences into the passive voice if they can be changed. Maybe there's a sentence or two, I'm not telling you, or possibly three, I'm not telling you, that cannot be changed into the passive voice. So if it can be changed, change it, and if it can't, leave it. So put the video on pause, do this, and I will be there on the next slide. See you in a moment. Okay, let's look. How did you do? Mr. Renegade hugged the dog madly. This one can be changed. And Mr. Renegade is a proper noun. It's the name of the man. So let's say it's important. It's not no one or someone or they. So the dog was hugged madly by Mr. Renegade. Rudyard Kipling wrote the wonderful poem If, and it is a wonderful poem. The wonderful poem, If, was written by Rudyard Kipling. The person, the author of this poem, is very important, as is the title. So, the wonderful poem, If, was written by Rudyard Kipling. This next one, there's no object, so there's no passive. Something happened. The passive is not possible. Let's look at the next one. The teacher will return the homework tomorrow. There's our object. The homework will be returned by the teacher tomorrow. It could be your choice. You could say the homework will be returned tomorrow with no by the teacher. It depends how you feel about it. Either way, if you just said the homework will be returned tomorrow, that's okay. We more or less imagine the teacher. But if you think it's important to state the teacher in this example, you would say the homework will be returned by the teacher tomorrow. So sometimes it's subjective. It's what you consider important. Sometimes with words like no one and they and someone, it's obviously not important. The rooster crows when the sun rises. Not possible. Someone, so there, announced the flight departure. So when you're at an airport, you can hear that. Flight 342 to Bahrain is leaving in 10 minutes. The flight departure was announced. It doesn't matter who's announcing it. And in fact, I think it's a recording. It's not even, it's a live person when they recorded it, but when they play it all the time, it's just a recording. So it doesn't matter. It's not important. So we say the flight departure was announced. Best use of passive voice here, better than active, because we don't want to mention this. It's not important. The famous author has released another book. Another book has been released by the famous author. So the passive voice with the by actor is important. Pilots have always landed airplanes, British spelling airplanes. Airplanes have always been landed by pilots. So by pilots is somewhat obvious, but without it, it seems strange to say airplanes have always been landed. It just seems incomplete, although the pilots is very obvious. So sometimes it's just subjective. You have to work out which is better. There are rules. If there's no object, then you just can't do it. That isn't subjective. But sometimes, and if it's someone you don't want to use, you don't want to say by someone. But sometimes by pilots or by the teacher, that can be subjective if you feel it's important. It depends on what you feel is important. All right? You ready for idioms? Let's look at the idioms. Okay, let's look at the idioms. The beautiful colors in these idioms. I love to get up at the edge of dawn or the crack of dawn. Let me tell you the correct answer and then I'll explain dawn. It's the crack of dawn. Dawn is the time between night and morning when the sun, like this, the sun is just rising. We say it's the crack. A crack is a little piece, a little hole. So it's the crack of dawn. I am tired. I have enjoyed spending the evening with you, but I must call it a night or sing for my bed. We say, I must call it a night. It means I must say goodbye. I must say stop. I must call it a night. In the evening, you say it. You can't say this in the morning or in the afternoon. In the evening, if you want to stop, you say, I must call it a night. All right? So we finished. We have finished this lesson. Please do the practice exercises, and I will teach you again on the next video. See you soon. Thank you. Bye.